Hey, this is Brendan Allen from ComicCon.com. Today, our guest is Cullen Bunn. He's going to be talking about his new prose book for middle readers called Crooked Hills. Good morning, Cullen. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good. So, Crooked Hills. Tell us about the book. What's going on with this one?
Crooked Hills, as you mentioned, it's a middle reader book. I've actually started talking about it as an all ages book. And by that, I mean, kids can like it, adults will like it. It's, uh, it's, it's, uh, it's fine for kids to read, but I think adults will get creeped out by it as well. But yeah, it's a prose novel. It's about a kid who goes on his summer vacation to a small town in the Missouri Ozarks that just happens to be the most haunted town in America, and he gets embroiled in some trouble with uh, a fetch, which is like this hellhound type creature, and a witch that lives out in the woods. Not just one witch, but a couple of witches, and just goes on a number of adventures and gets into these harrowing escapades.
Nice, nice. And this one's live on Kickstarter right now. It's going to be about 3 weeks left on it. Published by Outland Entertainment on Outer Shadows, which is an imprint that you're curating for them. How's that going so far?
It's great. Crooked Hills is the third book under the imprint. We did another book, which was an anthology I edited called Swords in the Shadows, which is currently available. We did a novella that I wrote called Rays, which is a very dark sword and sorcery book that's available. And then Crooked Hills will be our third book. It's been a lot of fun to work with them. You know this. I'm a huge fan of the horror genre,
You
and I
don't say.
yeah, right. And I got my start in writing. I was writing horror stories. That's how I mean, short stories. I know, most people know me for comics, but for years and years, I was writing short stories. I was editing a small press horror magazine for years, and I just I've never been able to shake that side of what I want to do. So
Mhm.
this gives me a great opportunity to work with some great people. The Outland Entertainment folks are just awesome to work with, and yeah, I think Outer Shadows, that's the imprint name. It gives me an opportunity to do some interesting things because we can do comics, we can do prose novels, we can do anthologies, we can do role playing games, we can do board games, and we've got all that kind of stuff lined up. Things we're wanting to do uh, for this imprint. The only thing standing against us is time.
Now, you mentioned that you used to write a lot more prose. I've got what is it? Passage in Black is another prose book of yours.
Yes.
Having written now both prose books and comic books, I think there's a huge difference between how those are written and how you lay them out and things like that. Like, what are some of the differences, and how do you reconcile the different media?
Yeah, it's there's some. I mean, the biggest difference is when you're working in both prose and comics are collaborative because you're collaborating with the editor in both. You're always collaborating in some way with the reader. So really all art is collaborative. Comics is a little more so because for me at least, since I'm not an artist, I'm working with artists, I'm working with colorists, I'm working with letterers, editors, designers. There's a lot more collaboration. While with a prose, for the most part, it's me putting that story out there, and then the editor comes in and fixes all my many mistakes and logic errors. And then the other big difference between prose and comics, while outlining is important in both for me, just because I can very easily get lost in what I'm doing. Comics, the outline is much more detailed, much more focused because comics is a medium that's very limited in terms of the pages, the panel counts, what can be put in a panel, how many panels can be on a page. So I do a lot more and a lot more detailed outlining when it comes to comic books.
Now, there's a quote here. It says, Crooked Hills, Missouri is a combination of many of the small towns in which I grew up, from Newton Grove, North Carolina to Thayer, Missouri. Thayer, in particular, helped to form a template for Crooked Hills. Those towns are rich with interesting people and more interesting legends and ghost stories. So, tell us about Thayer and kind of how that inspired you to write this book and some of the stories in the book.
Yeah, so I feel like I've been very lucky. I lived in a lot of small towns, a lot of very, from a very young age, I was hearing these creepy backwoods stories. In Newton Grove, for instance, we lived in a house there was a lake behind the house where a boy was supposed to have drowned, and his spirit
Of
was
course.
supposed to wander around the perimeter of the lake at night, and I was terrified of that, but also but also fascinated. Um, but when I was so I was 18 or 19, I moved from North Carolina to Thayer, Missouri, and we lived way out in the woods. My parents decided they wanted to try their hands at a cattle farm, but we lived way out in the woods. You had to drive through two creeks to get to the house, not over creeks. You had to drive through the creeks to get to the house.
I've had a driveway like that before. I know
Yeah, and
exactly what you're talking about.
and and it just there were just so many interesting things. As soon as I moved there, I was just there's a lot of stuff that that inspired Crooked Hills. There's a for instance, there's a scene in the book where our lead character Charlie goes downstairs in the house they're visiting, and there's a bucket down at the bottom of the house, and it's got a board over it or a book. And when he takes the book off the top, there are three tarantulas in the bucket, and they leap up out at him. That all happened to me because there, nobody thinks about Missouri as having a big tarantula population, but Thayer had thousands of them. And like you drive down the dirt road, there were during the fall, there's a mass tarantula migration in Thayer, and you drive down the road, and the road is just pebbled with tarantulas marching from one side of the road to the other by the thousands.
Are they
And
native to this continent? How does that even happen?
oh yeah, I mean Texas. I think, and I a while back I researched it. I think they're all Texas Browns, but for some reason they move through that area of the Ozarks every year. Tarantulas and scorpions and all these things that that I encountered. And by the way, when those tarantulas leapt out of that bucket at me, that's exactly what I thought. I thought to myself, are they native to this area? But yeah, so there were just
Well, I was just
little
trying to
things.
think if it was invasive, like where the hell they would have come from, how they
They
had
were
bred so much,
invasive.
whatever. But
They invaded my house and my face. They were trying to get me. But my younger brother, charmingly decided to put those tarantulas in a bucket to surprise me with them.
and knew that if you put the book on there, you'd be so curious that you
Had
had
to,
to look to see
had
what was
to,
it.
yeah,
That's a
had
brilliant.
to.
See, now I know how to build a Cullen trap now.
That's
Is
it.
with a bucket,
That's how you get me.
put a book over it. Yes,
But
nice.
it was such an interesting place to live. It was full of interesting people, but just being out there. I mean, I remember standing there one of the first nights I lived in that house, looking out the window, and the fog was like rolling across the yard, and it just was very inspirational to me.
Hmm.
And that's I thought to myself, if I were a little younger when I moved here, what would this be like? And that's where that's really the first seeds of Crooked Hills, and it's a book that it's the kind of book I would have wanted to read when I was younger. It's
Nice.
fun, but it's also I don't really cheap out on the scares. It's not quote unquote dumbed down for kids, because kids are too smart for that nonsense. They recognize it if you're talking down to them. Uh,
Sure.
but it's fun. It's I've described it in some places I've described it as the Goonies meet the Blair Witch. And it's these kids getting in way over their heads, dealing with uh, very powerful supernatural forces.
But so for parents, like, I've got an 8-year-old and I've got a 10-year-old. For parents, they just know that there's not going to be any like gore or gratuitous like swearing or anything in it because
No,
it
no,
is
no. Yeah,
classified as a middle reader.
it is middle reader. It's PG. It's like I said, if you'd watch the Goonies, you could. The Goonies is actually probably has a little more language in it than this book does. It's definitely
Yeah,
younger
PG
audiences.
didn't mean what it means now back in the 80s, right?
That's right, right, exactly. But yeah, parents should feel fine with younger kids reading it. I mean, there's some spooky stuff in it, but it's not there are no dripping entrails and horrible sex scenes or anything.
Okay, just good sex scenes, no horrible ones. Okay.
No, look, yeah, it's very appropriate, age appropriate.
Good, good. That's fantastic. Okay, and then I'm looking here. It says Crooked Hills was originally published in 2011 by Earwig Press, and it's been out of print. And Outland is bringing it back under your imprint.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious. It says here that some changes were made to update it, and I'm just curious. As a writer, looking back at this work from 12 years ago, how much growth did you see, and what kind of things did you look back on? You're like, that really just needs to be tweaked a little bit. As a writer now, obviously very different than the last decade, right?
Yeah, it was. I definitely see myself as a different writer. I didn't go in and make massive changes to the style or what I had written. There are a few places where we added a little bit. Most of the changes that I made were to uh, eliminate things that would seem out of time and place.
Hmm.
In the time since I've written it, there were some things that I wanted to to update or tweak so that it just didn't seem anachronistic in a way.
Sure.
And
Hmm.
I remember when the stand came out and they did an updated version of the stand, or maybe it wasn't the stand. What was I don't know what I was reading. This No, I was thinking of these updates. I can't remember what it was. There was an update of something, and they were talking about a TV show that was like 20 years earlier.
Hmm.
It just
Sure,
felt
sure.
out of place. So I was trying to make sure that I wasn't mentioning things that just didn't seem right, or didn't that would make the reader stop reading to try to figure out what was going on with something I mentioned.
Right.
Some video game I mentioned that they've never heard of because it's been gone for 20 years. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, and then I had the benefit. Outland has a really good editing team, so they really went in and dug into it and caught a few things here and there that needed some attention. So this is definitely what I would consider the preferred version of the book. And also, I mean, the cost of that original edition is ridiculous. If you go out and try to find one now, they're very expensive.
Well, I mean, the expense is warranted, right? It's a great
Oh,
book.
well, of course. But the nice thing now is, Crooked Hills has always been in my mind, and I've got sort of a big master plan for where Crooked Hills goes. And this is, if you look at the cover, it says book one right there because we're moving on to I'm currently working on the second book in the series, and the plan is to continue it and actually do the series I've always wanted to do finally.
Right on, right on. All right, well, this has been Cullen Bunn talking about his Kickstarter, Crooked Hills. You can get a digital copy of the book right now well, not right now, when the Kickstarter ends, but the Kickstarter is live right now. Digital edition is at the $8 tier. Print editions come in at the $16 tier. You get both for 20. Looks like you can get some autographed copies, postcard with an original. I love this idea. Cullen will
Yeah.
write you an original story set in this setting of Crooked Hills, and it may get published later on, but you'll have the original. That's a really cool backer reward there.
Yeah, it is something. I did it when we did our first project with Ray's. I did short handwritten Ray's stories on the back
Hmm.
of postcards. So I thought I'd try it again. Although I would remember when I was writing those stories on those postcards, I kept saying to myself, never again. I'll never do this again. Never again. But yeah, you will have a one of a kind story autographed, written by me by hand. Um, and some of them had drawings on, may have drawings and everything else what I'm
Hmm.
doing while I'm working on them. But yeah,
Right
they're
on.
definitely a unique piece of Crooked Hills history.
So we'll drop the link in the show notes, and as of right now, it's about halfway funded. Today there are 24 days to go. By the time this goes up, there'll probably be like 3 weeks left to go. But it's available right now on Kickstarter. Go ahead and check that link out. Cullen, thank you very much for your time this morning. We'll see
Yeah.
you. In 2 weeks? We'll see you.
Oh yeah, we've got something else going on. Yeah.
Something really cool. That's gonna be fun.
We do. And you're traveling to New York this weekend, right?
I leave in 2 days to New York, and I am not packed.
Oh, you better get to it. Well, thanks again for having me. I appreciate it. Safe travels, and yeah, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so
All
much.
right.